It's My Nerd World. Welcome to it, a Star Wars podcast. On the show this week, back to the movie theater. I went and saw The Empire Strikes Back on the big screen. Well, okay, it was a big screen. I wish it was a bigger screen. But it was an amazing experience, and not for the reasons that I thought it was going to be. I'll share that with you. Friend of the show, Brian Martin, has tossed an article at me. I was hesitant to talk about it on the show, but I read it, and I got comments to make. Yeah, it's about more negativity about the sequels. We'll get into it. Plus, a lot of listener feedback to dive into this week, and a smattering of news, a sprinkle of news. We'll get to all of it coming up on the show, brought to you by My Nerd World and mynerdworld.net. So, I have some really exciting things happening with My Nerd World and EMBARK. I hope you'll stick around after listener feedback to find out what they are, including more freebies. So details on the way, but for now, let's get to this week's show.
It's an instinct. A feeling. The Force brought us together. We're not alone. Good people will fight if we lead them.
People keep telling me they know me. No one does.
But I do.
Long have I waited. And now you're coming together. Is your undoing.
Confronting fear is the destiny of a Jedi. Your destiny. The Force will be with you. Always.
My Nerd World.
You know, if it wasn't for the fact that I've got a full-time job and then I have added to that this abundance of a bunch of projects apart from my full-time job, I really have this desire to sit down and just talk about the fandom and write a book about the fandom and sort of, you know, a quasi-psychological study into the mind of the different factions of the Star Wars fandom. I am Jon Justice. Welcome to the show this week. It's a Star Wars podcast. I'm glad you're with the show. The email, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. The website is mynerdworld.net. I hope you'll take a moment when you get a chance and go to the website and sign up for my newsletter. I'm going to be expanding the mailing list out to essentially be a newsletter, probably something once a month. And I'm working on something really, I think it's special. And I hope that if you've read the EMBARK stories that you'll get a kick out of it. I'll explain to you what that is after we get past listener feedback later on in the show this week. So this is one of those shows where I didn't necessarily have a major topic to talk about. We have a couple of news items came out this week. There's been a lot of Star Wars, the High Republic information released, some artwork about lightsabers that some of the new characters are going to be using. I didn't talk about it on last week's show, but there was a piece of art of a younger Yoda from the High Republic books that was released. And again, my hype level over the High Republic is pretty low right now. I like the visual, the going from cartoons to the live action shows to obviously the movies. Even though I am an author, I'll definitely check the books out once they're released and see if it's something that I want to get into. But I'm more excited for the visual aspect of Star Wars, and I always have been. Which again may sound weird based off the fact that I'm writing these stories. But again, a separate part of that is, I can't be a director and I have stories that I want to tell, so I write books instead. Also, there was a bit of a hubbub, a to-do, rumblings, excitement. There was the packaging for the new Ahsoka lightsabers came out. And a lot of people are pointing to the artwork on the packaging looks an awful lot like Rosario Dawson, who is supposed to be portraying Ahsoka in the Mandalorian TV series. It has a passing resemblance. It is different from the artwork that we've seen on the different Ahsoka products, and more specifically the Black Series figures. But that popped up on Reddit over the weekend, and so that caused quite a bit of commentary. I think it goes to show that people are really, really excited about Ahsoka being in the Mandalorian series, and I'm just excited for the Mandalorian season 2 as it is. As I talked about on last week's show, I've actually been going back and watching the entire series, and it is so easy to move through that. It's just so fast. It's so great too. I really am coming around to a greater appreciation of the Mandalorian series. So, heading into the show this week, I didn't really have a topic. I got a lot of listener feedback we're going to get to, and it was going to be a listener feedback-focused show. And it still is partly going to be that. A friend of the show, Brian Martin, sent me an article from The Escapist, written by an individual named Darren Mooney, about the sequel trilogies. I was hesitant to talk about it on the show. Brian had asked, what are your thoughts on this article? And after reading it, I took some notes down, and I'll be sharing it with you once again. This consistent drumbeat of negativity around the sequel trilogy, and more specifically, The Rise of Skywalker. I will add my 2 cents and break down a bit of what this individual had to say with regard to their opinions of The Rise of Skywalker. Before I get to that, though, this is where I want to start. And I want to start off on a positive note, because I'm going to keep it positive, but the article is a bit ridiculous, and I'm going to be tearing it apart. So, on a positive note, we recently started back up our A-list accounts, my wife and I did, more specifically to go see Tenet in the theater. And Melinda had mentioned to me, she's like, I really want to get to the movies to take advantage of the A-list that we have. And she noticed that The Empire Strikes Back for the 40th anniversary, and it's been out for a while, a couple of weeks now, was playing locally, oddly enough, at the movie theater where we saw The Rise of Skywalker opening night. So we decided to go ahead and get tickets for Saturday night. Neither of my sons, 13 and 18 years old, had ever seen Star Wars on the big screen. And beyond that, my youngest, Kyle, hasn't really gone through comprehensively all the movies. He's seen all of the sequel trilogy films in the theater, but when it comes to the prequels and the original trilogy, he doesn't really recall ever sitting down at an age where he was really fully comprehending them and watching them. So, and certainly never on the big screen. So we decided, all right, let's go ahead and get the family, because I haven't seen The Empire Strikes Back on the big screen since '97 in the special editions. Let's go ahead and buy tickets and go see it on Saturday night. So on Friday night, Kyle and I sat down and we watched A New Hope, which he hung in there for. I think The Mandalorian actually did a lot of good in conditioning Kyle, at least, my 13-year-old, to watching A New Hope, because it is paced slower. I mean, there's just no denying that. Once you get off of Tatooine in A New Hope, it's kind of game on and it gets moving pretty quick. But the beginning part of that movie, by today's movie standards and the way that stories are told right now on the big screen, it does move slower than a movie that you'd see, today going to the movie theater. So needless to say, he was really excited about being able to go see The Empire Strikes Back on the big screen, as was my 18-year-old. So we went and got some dinner beforehand and then head on over to the movie theater a little bit early. I was a little disappointed because the theater that the movie theater, the AMC we went to, the actual hall they decided to put The Empire Strikes Back in, was one of their smallest screens. So that was a bit of a disappointment. I was really looking forward to seeing the film on a much larger screen. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was still a movie theater screen, but by today's, home theater experience standards, It was bigger, but not by like a movie theater sized bigger. That being said, and apart from some of the kids who came with their grandparents who apparently don't know how to shut up in a movie theater and having to have the old guy saying, "Be quiet, please," even though this is a movie that I've seen a gazillion times, it was an incredibly enjoyable experience. And it was an incredibly enjoyable experience, not just because we were watching The Empire Strikes Back in a Star Wars movie, or I was watching The Empire Strikes Back in and a Star Wars movie in the theater. That, of course, is a fantastic thing. But it was also a great experience because being in a movie theater, my sons and myself, we're not going to go on our phones. We're just going to enjoy the films as they were intended to be enjoyed. And I've talked about this a lot on the show, and I continue to try to get into the habit of putting my phone in another room and making sure there's no laptop or screen available when I'm watching any TV, because that should suffice, especially a movie, because it really does ruin the experience. For me, it does. You know, having my phone and even going on my phone during a doing that thing with my fingers boring scene of any film, it really does break up the momentum of watching it and the experience that we're supposed to have. You know, when you go see a movie in a movie theater, you are there and you're locked in, and there has to be a bit of letting go of yourself and letting the movie wash over you and immersing yourself in it. That can be done at home, but you got to kind of work at it because of all the distractions that we had. With that, it was an amazing experience because I was there with my family, and I was there with my wife and my boys in the same way that my father brought me to the movies. And I talked about this recently on a blog, My Nerd blog at mynerdworld.net, and on the show, and figuring out exactly which movie theater it was that we saw A New Hope for the first time. Sitting next to my 18-year-old and hearing him chuckle during all the exchanges, the tense exchanges between Han Solo and Princess Leia. Listening to Kyle, who is the furthest sitting away from me on the other side of Melinda, who is sitting next to Logan, and hearing him chuckle throughout the film. Star Wars is about family. I mean, that's ultimately what all these stories are, including the sequel trilogy, and more specifically, The Rise of Skywalker. And this is going to get into exactly what I will be using to push back against this editorial that was written in this article that Brian Martin wanted to share with me. Ultimately, these stories are about family and your identity within a family, and that it doesn't always mean that it has to be blood, whether you're adopted, whether you're a part of a group of individuals who share in the same beliefs. That can also be a family. And that's what made it an experience that I'll never forget. After all these years, after seeing these films hundreds of times, if not thousands by this point, going on a Saturday, late afternoon, 4:30, movie starts around 5 o'clock, to see The Empire Strikes Back, on a bigger screen in a movie theater with the lights going down. The best part about it wasn't what I saw on screen, even though The Empire Strikes Back is still an incredible film and holds my interest every time I see it. But it was being there with my sons and my wife and listening to them and their joy. It's different than it was when I was a kid. The Empire Strikes Back, all the Star Wars films growing up in the 80s carried a lot more weight to them because we didn't have all the distractions that we had. When we came home and watched TV, it was on small, square screens, and we didn't have the ability to watch it over and over again. That's why the action figures were so important to us growing up. It's a much different world that we live in now, but for those 2+ hours that we sat in the movie theater in the dark watching this amazing film back from the 80s with my sons, we were all taken to a galaxy far, far away, seeing that vision of what George Lucas had in his mind and seeing it play out on the big screen without any distractions. That's the power of what Star Wars is, and it was such an amazing and enjoyable experience. And I do believe that that's a part of the reason why so many people have such a hard time with the sequel trilogy, because there is this desire to feel that again, and this desire to really, really like this thing on the screen that we've been anticipating and talking about for hours and hours on end, and then when we're disappointed, we don't know what to do with it. And that explains a big part of the fandom. Cassian Andor to Jyn Erso after they go to Edu, and Cassian doesn't kill her father, and she's mad. Jyn is mad at Cassian. He's like, "You're in shock. You're in shock, and you don't know where to put it. So you're putting it on me." Now, whether or not he was right or wrong, right? Ultimately, that is a really good example of what happens in the fandom. And as I've said many times on the show, it's never, ever, ever going to change, because we live in a world now with social networking, with YouTube, and all of the different reasons why people want to go and share their opinions, mostly negative within the fandom, because of what it gives to them on a number of different levels, from an emotional standpoint, from a dopamine rush to the money involved with writing stories catering to that portion of the fandom that still continue to want to break down these films in a negative way to justify why this thing that they were supposed to like, they didn't. For example, I love Depeche Mode, right? It's almost like a reverse apologist mentality. I love Depeche Mode, and I will ultimately be very much an apologist when it comes to their music, but over a period of time, I'll come back around and realize, okay, I don't like that nearly as much. I like a lot of the newer the newer content created from any of the things that I love, right? And then eventually over time you come back around and opinions form. Like the last Depeche Mode album, Spirit, I really, really liked it when it came out. But after a couple of years and I go back and listen to it and I go, you know what, it's not my favorite album. There's a couple of tracks on there that are amazing, but you know, the older stuff is better. And there's a lot of ways the fandom treats Star Wars much the same way, except now they simply need to justify over and over again why they don't like the particular film rather than just saying, I just didn't like it. And I don't have a problem with people not liking a Star Wars film. I do have a problem with people not liking a Star Wars film and then laying out arguments as to why they don't like it that ignore actual things that take place on screen. Okay, so that brings us to this article that Brian Martin wanted me to look at and share my opinion on, and I am going to do that right now on the show.
This is not going to go the way you think.
So Darren Mooney, no idea who this dude is, wrote this within the past week on The Escapist. Brian Martin asked me if I would be so kind as to share my thoughts on the article. So it's titled, "The Star Wars Sequel Trilogy Didn't Need a Plan. The Rise of Skywalker Needed a Vision." Okay, so let me start off by saying my biggest complaint when it comes to the complainers is that they selectively apply the logic to particular films and ignore the same application of the logic to other films they like. So they'll apply these complaints to the films they don't like, but they will not apply the same logic to the film that they like. And that's what bothers me. You don't have to like it, but if you're going to try to tear it down to justify why you don't like it, I hope you will be at least intellectually honest enough to go back to the original trilogy that you apparently love and realize that if you apply the same logic that you're doing to the sequel trilogy you didn't like, it also applies to that original trilogy too. You're just choosing to ignore it on the original trilogy, but to apply it on the sequel trilogy, and specifically here, The Rise of Skywalker, to try to justify why you didn't like it. All right, so I won't read the entire article. I've gone through and highlighted some of the larger points, and I will provide my commentary, and then we'll get into listener feedback this week. So, Darren Mooney from The Escapist writes this: "The Star Wars sequel trilogy didn't need a plan. The Rise of Skywalker needed a vision." One of the biggest debates around the way in which Disney managed the brand, right, has been, it's increasingly common to argue the company needed a plan for the three films and that a lot of the problems with the three films would have been solved if they had mapped them out in advance. It's easy to understand the basis for this argument, and I actually appreciate what Darren did here. He says the pot was recently stirred by Daisy Ridley talking about Rey's parentage was a matter of debate throughout the entire development cycle. Okay. Now, what he actually argues later on is that planning it out doesn't necessarily mean we still would have gotten great films. But first he goes here, saying that these are fair criticisms with regard to Rey's lineage. He says the reveal of Rey's lineage in The Rise of Skywalker was so poorly handled that details of it had to be patched in supplemental material that helpfully clarified whether or not Sheev Palpatine was sexually active while on the throne. But that's not exclusive to the sequels. And this is what I'm talking about. Again, Darren's entitled to his opinion, but you're selectively applying logic to justify why you didn't like the movie. The same thing can be said in the original trilogy on a myriad of individuals and people, specifically going back to Palpatine. We didn't have any background for him. We didn't know who the dude was when he popped up in The Empire Strikes Back. We didn't know who the dude was when he popped up in Return of the Jedi. If you wanted to know more before the prequels came out, guess what you had to do? You had to go read supplementary material. Again, you're entitled to your opinion, but man, it drives me nuts. Sure, if you want to level that complaint, go for it. But please, don't be a hypocrite and don't have a double standard. You know, the original trilogy isn't some sacred thing out there. It's amazing and it's great, but it's got just as many flaws as the sequel trilogy has. The fandom just chooses to ignore them. And I'm cool with it, because I do the same thing with the sequel trilogy. All right, let's get into more of this. The character Rose Tico had been introduced as an important part of the universe in The Last Jedi, but was sidelined in The Rise of Skywalker. Theoretically, planning this stuff in advance might prevent such missteps. Okay, again, you're selectively applying the logic. Would you like an example? Sure, I'll give you one. Yoda in The Empire Strikes Back. Yoda. That Yoda. He had 12 minutes of screen time in The Empire Strikes Back. Do you know how much screen time he had in Return of the Jedi? You ready? 4. Rose Tico had 13 minutes of screen time in The Last Jedi. Did I say Return of the Jedi? I don't know. Let me back up. Empire Strikes Back. Yoda, 12 minutes of screen time. Return of the Jedi, he had 4. Rose Tico, 13 minutes of screen time in The Last Jedi. In The Rise of Skywalker, he had 3, or she had 3. I don't see anybody ever making the complaint when it came to Return of the Jedi that they introduced this character who had 13 minutes of screen time that was pivotal to The Empire Strikes Back and Luke's training. As a matter of fact, if you're going to apply the logic of Rose Tico being sidelined and that upsetting you, you really need to be ticked off about Yoda. Not only did Yoda have 13 minutes of screen time in The Empire Strikes Back, he was arguably the most important factor to Luke Skywalker eventually becoming a Jedi. He only gets 4 minutes in Return of the Jedi, and he dies! So you tell me, who got sidelined in a bigger way? Yoda in the original trilogy or Rose Tico in the sequel trilogy? I rest my case. Wish I can do a debate with these people, I swear. Theoretically, planning this stuff in advance might help prevent such missteps if you're of the opinion that they were missteps. All right, moving on in the article. After all, the only stretch of the Star Wars filmography that was predetermined endpoint and rough roadmap was the prequel trilogy guided by George Lucas. He's absolutely right. He then talks about how similarly the established fan base was no more welcoming with Zack Snyder's planned Superman saga with the Man of Steel's Batman vs. Superman and the Justice League. So Darren actually, it does a little bit of intellectual honesty in the article saying that just because it wasn't planned out doesn't mean that if it was planned out, the sequel trilogy would have been any better in his mind. Okay, right? And he says as much right here. Disney Star Wars sequel trilogy plan not needed. The Star Wars Rise of Skywalker needed a vision. And I'm going to push back on that too. So we get further into the article because he makes a lot of examples here. He talks about Breaking Bad. He talks about Deep Space Nine. Okay. So he tries to give examples of things being planned versus not being planned, right? And it really ends up being somewhat irrelevant. Okay. Then he gets to this. So The Rise of Skywalker did not need a plan crafted years in advance. What it needed was a bold, creative vision and something that was worth saying. That is such a subjective statement. He goes on to say, The Rise of Skywalker, the train came off the tracks, and it was the worst reviews, it had the worst reviews for any live-action Star Wars film. Okay. That's irrelevant, and I'm going to explain why in a moment. But let's get back to this idea that The Rise of Skywalker needed a creative vision, needed a bold creative vision, and something that was worth saying. Let's stop here real quick. Brandon Winerdy, he hosts a Talking Bay 94, and he was recently interviewed on Around the Galaxy. Okay, and on Talking Bay 94 with Brandon Winerdy, he interviews a bunch of people involved in Star Wars films. Okay. It's a really interesting podcast. And what he said on the Around the Galaxy podcast, I actually kind of respect it. He doesn't like the Rise of Skywalker, and that's cool. Nobody has to like these films, okay? Again, I just want people to be intellectually honest when it comes to the criticism and not ignore what actually happens on screen in order to try to justify their negative views of the film. But Brandon made a really interesting comment because he said, and I'm paraphrasing, that he was under the impression the film was rushed and perhaps maybe the people didn't care about it. But when he talks to the creators of The Rise of Skywalker, he finds out how passionate they were about the project and how much they cared about it. And from an alternate point of view of somebody who loves The Rise of Skywalker, it absolutely had something to say. One of the major themes of The Rise of Skywalker was it doesn't matter where you come from. It matters who you are. Family doesn't have to mean blood. And the fact that he just ignores that in this because he doesn't like it is really annoying because it's so subjective. Okay, getting to The Rise of Skywalker train came off the tracks. It has the worst reviews for any live-action Star Wars film. You have to take into account the fandom right now, social media, the way that people dig their heels in to reinforce their views, and the fact that The Rise of Skywalker suffered from a review angle because you had a fandom split with what happened with The Last Jedi. You had a large group of people, mostly Reylo types, that loved The Last Jedi, and then you had a group of individuals that hated The Last Jedi because of what it did to Luke. Which, by the way, I just got to go back and mention this really quick. Watching The Empire Strikes Back driving home, my wife was talking about all the poor decision-making in The Empire Strikes Back, and she's right, and all the whining done by Luke Skywalker, and it made me laugh, and I was laughing in the middle when she was talking because I don't disagree with her. I think it's part of the character and the way that he was written, but it really does sort of justify how when he got older and he failed in the Jedi Academy because of what Ben Solo did, why he would have gone and isolated himself on an island somewhere not to be found by anybody, and why he didn't want to join up with Rey in the first place. It was very much in Luke Skywalker's character to do that. Getting back to the reviews when it comes to The Rise of Skywalker, The Rise of Skywalker suffered because half of the audience not half, we'll just say for the sake of argument, the portion of the audience that loved The Last Jedi didn't get what they wanted in The Rise of Skywalker, while the portion that hated The Last Jedi was desperately looking for some type of redemption, and they didn't necessarily like what they got in The Rise of Skywalker. So, of course, the reviews were going to be bad. Here's the ultimate pushback, though. Look at the box office of all the films adjusting for inflation, and The Rise of Skywalker was third behind The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. So, I'm sorry, when you're looking at the fandom as a whole, The Rise of Skywalker doesn't make the third amount of money, most money, in all of the Star Wars films combined, accounting for inflation, if people didn't go see it over and over again. So I'm not talking about the hardcore fandom, I'm talking about just the fandom, and the vast majority of individuals really liked The Rise of Skywalker. All right, getting back to the article. The Force Awakens was an exercise in nostalgia, writes Darren. Effectively a faithful recreation of the original Star Wars. Okay. And then it talks about some of the details of The Rise of Skywalker. It talks about The Last Jedi was a potent meditation on the franchise's core themes for a new generation. And then he says, in contrast, The Rise of Skywalker was mostly a negation of The Last Jedi. That's subjective. From my opinion, it was not. Be that as it may. The example he gives is, an early scene in the movie finds Kylo Ren repairing the helmet he destroyed in The Last Jedi. Is there any reason for this action within the world of the movie? Yes, there is a reason for this action in the movie. He destroyed it in The Last Jedi because Snoke was mocking him for it. Snoke died. He was using it to perpetuate his dark side. It was a shield of which he can hide behind. Rey actually goes and calls him out for it again. Hiding behind your mask again, serving a new master. He was trying desperately to commit to the dark side, and the helmet was a catalyst for him to do that. It displays, it's a visual representation of the struggle that Kylo Ren was having. Because he was having difficulty moving towards the dark side. He was feeling the pull of the light, something that was happening in The Force Awakens. And he couldn't do it on his own. He actually needed the helmet back on his head to try to bring the dark side out of him because he was actually weaker in the dark side. So yeah, there was motivation for it, in my opinion. Most speculation points to outside marketing factors suggesting that putting Kylo Ren back in the mask makes it easier to use the character at Disney World, or that covering his mouth would make it easier to dub the character in post-production for late rewrites. And again, that's the kind of fanfic speculation that drives me nuts. Again, you're just trying to justify your point rather than actually looking for a reason and motivation why he would have gone and put the helmet back on again. And the default to marketing drives me nuts. It really does. Because I just don't buy into it. Yes, everything that they make in a Star Wars film, they'd like to go and market. But it's not like they're sitting... I'm not going to get into it. I say it all the time. Let me move forward. Now I'm just getting frustrated. Indicators point to a production cycle on The Rise of Skywalker that was troubled at best, without resorting to internet's conspiracy theories and speculation, which he did beforehand. He just did that beforehand. Speculation points to outside marketing suggesting putting the mask back on made it easier for the character at Disney World, and covering his mouth, they could dub in the character post-production for late rewrites. And then he actually follows it up with the nerve to say, without resorting to internet conspiracy theories and speculation when it comes to the troubled nature of the film. Guess what? Most Star Wars movies are troubled. The only one that really wasn't was The Last Jedi of the sequel trilogy. You had Tony Gilroy come in to salvage doing that thing with my fingers, Rogue One. You had rewrites that were done after Harrison Ford got injured during The Force Awakens, and that script completely changed. We all know what happened when it came to the director swap for Solo. And, of course, what happened with Colin Trevorrow and The Rise of Skywalker. And everybody seems to forget. They want to point to and say that The Rise of Skywalker was rushed. However, people are very quick to dismiss the fact, because this writer does the same thing here, talking about a rushed schedule. But what does he not do? He doesn't bother to add in the detail that J.J. Abrams actually pushed the release date by 6 months. And most of the pre-production that was done for the Colin Trevorrow Duel of the Fates version of the film was stuff that was still used and moved over to The Rise of Skywalker. So the additional 6 months in the pre-production that was used to ultimately become what became of The Rise of Skywalker kind of negates this idea that this was a rushed production by any stretch. Back to the article. Some critics complained The Last Jedi represented a rejection of The Force Awakens, but Rian Johnson's film had a clear and consistent through line that challenged its predecessor in the way that most good sequels do. In contrast, The Rise of Skywalker doesn't even know what it is, let alone how it meaningfully relates to the previous films. And again, this is so subjective. Because the writer happened to like The Last Jedi, he's not going to nitpick it to the nth degree. I read plenty of articles complaining about The Last Jedi, making the similar complaints that he's making to The Rise of Skywalker about how there wasn't a story there. What was it actually about? More fundamentally, the article writer goes on to say than that, what is The Rise of Skywalker actually about? Is it actually saying? What is it actually saying? Is it possible to intuit a theme from various plot points, that Rey is not defined or shaped by her relationship to Palpatine, that she can move past the fact that she came from the worst possible place, to quote J.J. Abrams? However, none of that is in the movie. Instead, The Rise of Skywalker is a hollow confection with a Star Wars shell wrapped around it. None of that is in the movie. He just laid out the theme of the movie that's in the movie. Rey is not defined by the shape of her relationship to Palpatine, that she can move past the fact that she became from the worst possible place. However, none of that is in the movie. It's all over the movie. Leia, at the beginning of the film, is hugging Rey, saying, "Don't be afraid of who you are." Luke has an entire conversation with Rey on Octo when she wants to give up the lightsaber and become a hermit like Luke did. About her lineage, how Leia knew about her lineage. Not to mention the entire confrontation at the end of the film with Palpatine was all about the fact that she was moving on past who she was. Palpatine was trying to draw her in by saying, hey, Luke had his dad there. All you have here is me. She pushes back. My parents were strong. The end of the film has Luke and Leia as Force ghosts next to Luke's former home on Tatooine, giving Rey the nod that it was okay for her to adopt the Skywalker name and reject Palpatine, and none of that was in the film? It is this emptiness that haunts The Rise of Skywalker, which keeps drawing us back to the cynical tie-ins that expand the story or the imagined alternate versions of it. It is this failure that casts a shadow backwards over the two films leading to it. In truth, the sequel trilogy never had a plan. Better franchises have thrived without one. However, The Rise of Skywalker needed a vision. It had a vision. And it was a great vision, in my opinion. And it's a fantastic film. It's an interesting hybrid of the Star Wars movies. It serves as its own film and a fantastic, one of the best space opera movies of the past 20 years, in my opinion, on top of being an excellent and fitting finale for this entire series. And look, these are opinions, nothing more. But it's lame when they're formed by ignoring what actually happens on the big screen. The Empire Strikes Back. You could easily, if you wanted to, make the similar arguments that Darren made here. Right? What is The Empire Strikes Back about? Vader trying to track down Luke to turn him? Okay. If you wanted to go down that road, you can easily nitpick The Empire Strikes Back, right? The Rise of Skywalker. Rey needed to get to Exegol to stop Palpatine, while ultimately learning who she was in the process and rejecting her dark side past. Also, one more other note, and then we'll move on to listener feedback this week. I hate being this negative. Brian, it's your fault. You asked me. You don't have to like these movies. It's fine. I have emails from people all the time who stopped listening to the show because they hated The Rise of Skywalker because what happened to Ben, and they don't like hearing me talk positive about it. That's cool. You don't have to. But at least be intellectually honest about what actually happens in the movie when you're going to go and criticize it. Because I'm sorry, this article was trash. The dude's opinion was trash because he simply decided to ignore and not apply the same logic to the original trilogy, which I bet the dude loves. Cracks me up, too, right? I love The Empire Strikes Back, don't get me wrong. It is one of my favorite Star Wars movies of all time. Okay, and right now, the Rise of Skywalker is, but The Empire Strikes Back's great. But nobody nitpicks that, the way they do the prequels or the original trilogy. There's plenty if you use the same logic. Like, for example, like R2-D2 getting spat out by the swamp creature on Dagobah is really kind of ridiculous. The breaking of the fourth wall that C-3PO does when they're escaping Hoth during the evacuation and the door gets shut on him by Han and he says, looks at the camera, says, how typical. It's never going to go away. And I fully expect that friend of the show Miranda is going to write an email talking about how we're still talking about the sequel trilogy. Yeah, I know.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right, let's run through some listener feedback this week. And first, we'll start off with friend of the show, Bro, who has some opinions about The Mandalorian Season 2. Runs through a couple of different points in here, right? Talking about out there theories for The Mandalorian Season 2. Number one, the water world could be Kamino. Season 1, of course, you have Dr. Pershing. He's wearing the Kaminoan patch. Maybe Din Djarin's adventure to find out where Chilota, the child's home planet, is, takes him there. Seems like there would be some clues. I doubt that it's Kamino. It's possible. Anything's possible. But just based on what we've seen of Kamino, that planet was really had a lot of weather going on, and it just didn't seem to. I can't imagine a fishing trough going through on Kamino, but it's possible. And in Bro's defense, he did say out there theories. What about the Quarren, right? Well, they are good at maritime work, so why wouldn't they work and do business on water planets other than Mon Cala? Okay. Right? After Obi-Wan refound Kamino, I imagine it became just another planet in the Republic and New Republic, so why not have Quarren on it? Okay. I agree with you. It would be rad if the ice planet were Ilum. I bet it will be at the very end of the season. It may have something to do with kyber crystals and stumble on First Order activities. Okay? Sasha Banks. Maybe it's just a cameo. We keep seeing clips of the scene with the Twi'lek, Natalia Tina, looking over her shoulder at Din Djarin, but her actual role was pretty short. I mean, she was in that entire episode, though, bro. Just one season, right? Just one show, but she was in that entire show. Not at all a complaint, but it shows the misdirection trailers have embedded. Yep, if Sasha Banks is Sabine Wren, awesome, but I doubt it. Do you think the actor and Tia Sircar from Rebels could possibly make the jump and play Sabine, like Katie Sackhoff is expected to play Bo-Katan? I would like to see that, but we haven't heard anything of that happening, so I don't know at this point. I mean, anything's possible at this point. I'm leaning towards Sasha Banks being a character that was actually in one of the Aftermath novels that I mentioned on last week's show. Then Bro talks about what isn't in the trailer. Tamura Morrison. Lots of hype on the internet pushing him being Boba Fett. I think it's too easy. I think the Return of the Jedi Sarlacc ending is real, but maybe there is a corresponding Sarlacc outhole he blasted out of. But what if Morrison is playing the old clone at the Camino cloning facility? It ties into going to Camino. And if there is an Ahsoka, I expect Rex to be around there too. Yeah, so here's the deal. On Tamura Morrison's official actor page, it actually lists him as playing Boba Fett. So a lot of people took that as confirmation. Also, there's been a lot of talk about expecting Rex to be in the show, so that would make sense that he would play that character. And as we talked about on last week's show, there was footage in the trailer of the Mandalorian on a speeder bike that showed Boba Fett's helmet and backpack and jetpack on it. So it looks like he's going to be in the show. Just don't know how yet. Ahsoka Tano. I have a hunch that Ahsoka will be in the final episode chapter appearance, probably tying to some a cliffhanger, heading off into wild space and unknown region. Yeah, maybe. I was actually talking with Melinda about this, and it would be interesting to actually see the Rebels storyline get wrapped up in live action, as opposed to being a cartoon. And there was an actor that was teasing that he was actually training in much of the way that Ezra would have been training, where he trained by Kanan. I can't remember the actor's name, but that was being bandied about. He said he was just playing along. He looks like he could play Ezra. He said he was just screwing around, but you never know these days. Timothy Oliphant. I'm in the camp of Timothy playing Cobb Vanth. Yep, that was talked about earlier. I also think this is where we'll see the Boba Fett armor. Yep. And then he gets into some of the stuff that takes place in the Aftermath books, especially Cobb picking up Mandalorian armor from some Jawas, and a lot of speculation that it would actually go and be Boba Fett. Yeah, no, I think all those are possible. The only one that I don't necessarily agree with is Camino. I don't think that the planet they're on is Camino. It would be rad to see that. But again, just based off of what we know of Camino and how it's been shown in the film and in all the ancillary material, that's a very stormy planet, which those shots in the Mandalorian trailer didn't necessarily equate to that. But, bro, I appreciate your lengthy email nonetheless. Thanks for emailing in. All right, Michaela says this, talking about The Empire Strikes Back. The first script of Episode 5 by Lee Brackett. Vader and Anakin were two different characters, and the sister of Luke was a separate character named Nolith. Yeah, and we were talking about last week, going back to the original trilogy not being planned out, and Lucas making it up as he went along as well, just like the sequel trilogy. Purple Flower. Thank you, Michaela, for the email. I appreciate it. Purple Flower writes, I keep hearing a rumor of Pedro Pascal not being the Mandalorian anymore. Have you heard about this? Yes, I saw the article. It was based off some garbage clickbait that was thrown about in We Got This Covered, and I don't believe anything coming from We Got This Covered. And I haven't heard anything since then. Yeah, so I don't think there's any issues. Friend of the show, Severin, writes, my excitement, thank you, Purple Flower, I appreciate it. My excitement for the second season of The Mandalorian is so high right now, like most other hardcore Star Wars fans experiencing this spring and summer without really with really not much to look forward to in terms of entertainment, has massively contributed to my rising anticipation and joy that we're getting fresh content in less than 2 months. Not that I wouldn't be through the roof about it anyways, but I think with the state of the country being so upside down and backwards lately, having a chance to get lost in the comfortable, homey realm of Star Wars once again seems like a much-needed balm. My prediction for Mando Season 2, it's going to be even better than a boozy bubble bath. That was hard to say. Thank you, Severin. I tend to agree. All right, let's go here. James writes, I was wondering why you didn't respond to my email. That's awesome that you read it on the show. My name is James. You didn't have it because I never use it. I'm glad that other guy asked for the list of podcasts because I had the same question. There's not enough positivity on YouTube. So sad. Thanks again. Thank you, James. And I hope I didn't come off as too negative. I just get tired of the haters, and I like to push back on them a little bit. All right. Miranda, friend of the show, says this. Can we just skip over to October 30th immediately? I agree. Friend of the show, J.O.B., says this. John, I just wanted to say that I've been listening to you since you started the John and John show at KFMA in Tucson, which I believe was the time episode 1 came out. Yes, it was. Then on 104.1 The Truth when you came back to Tucson, and currently on my Nerd World. I really appreciate everything you do. Thank you. Wow, man, you go way back. You should also listen to the Justice and Drew show on Twin Cities News Talk. The Lowdown show. Edwin says this. Beskar plot armor. LOL. That's actually really funny. I love the term plot armor, and Beskar plot armor is even better. Thank you, Edwin. Dale Erdwin, in response to me saying there were too many desert planets last week, he says, we need a lot of desert planets. The Empire was built from slavery and stripping planets of their resources. Since the scenes in The Last Jedi, in The Last Jedi on Canto Bight, there have been more videos made about how corporations make money from both sides. Interesting take. I dig it. T.E. writes, Vader being Luke's dad was most definitely a late retcon. The book, The Secret History of Star Wars, goes deep into the development of the original trilogy and prequel trilogy and shows all of the sequel trilogy wasn't planned like the OT and prequel, how wrong they are. Yeah, exactly. Hey, and that's it. Thank you so much for hanging out on the show. I know I kind of blasted my way through listener feedback, but I got a football game starting, and I want to watch how bad the Vikings are going to lose again today. All right, before we wrap things up, though, I want to mention, again, the EMBARK series, books 1, 2, and 3 are available now if you go to Amazon.com. If you haven't picked up your preferred copy, you can get them in ebook, paperback, and audiobook. I've had some deals going on the past few days, and if you happen to listen to this on Sunday, you could probably still pick up books 2 and 3 in ebook at a discounted rate. But definitely go and pick up your preferred copy if you haven't done so already. It's how you can support the show. Also, if you're already a subscriber to the mailing list, which I'm now going to call the newsletter, do not worry, because you will get your free book. However, if you are not a part of the newsletter mailing list yet, go to mynerdworld.net and hit the link on the homepage. There's a brand new link available on the homepage right under the button to purchase the books. There's a sign up for the newsletter link. Now, why is this important? This is important because not only if you sign up to the newsletter, will you not get spammed with anything. That's first and foremost. But you'll have access to exclusive content, discounts available to nobody else except for individuals on the mailing list. And right now, I'm putting together a free book that I hope you'll be as excited to get your hands on as I am putting it together. So, as an incentive for joining the newsletter, I'm putting together a comprehensive Art of EMBARK book, and what this will entail will be all of my original sketches for the characters and vehicles in the books and on the cover. You'll get concept art, all the concept art leading up to the final drafts and the final versions of the artwork for the cover of the 3 books, and including the upcoming Gon Corbin and the Asteroid of Misfortune book. Also, I'm including in the Art of EMBARK book some snippets of deleted scenes that did not make it into the novels. I kept some pretty big scenes and some different some alternate takes of some scenes in the book, and I'm going to be including that in the Art of EMBARK book. This will be an ebook, and it'll be readable for anybody. Basically, it'll be in PDF form. But if you sign up for the newsletter, that should be done in the next week or two. As soon as it's finished, you will be sent the Art of EMBARK book. So I hope that you'll take a moment, go to mynerdworld.net, and even if you're not interested in the art book, I hope you sign up for the newsletter. I'm going to be doing some really fun things with it in the future, not just about EMBARK, but also about My Nerd World and the Star Wars podcast that I do. I've got a brand new company that I'm working with now when it comes to the newsletter, so it's going to be a little bit more comprehensive than it was before. And my goal is to make sure that every time I send the newsletter out, probably like once a month, that there's something in there that you'll enjoy, that everybody will enjoy. I want to make it worthwhile if you're going to be getting email. So go to mynerdworld.net and sign up for the newsletter, and you'll be on the list for that free Art of EMBARK book. Really looking forward to getting that finished. I like the way it's turned out so far, and there's going to be some interesting details and background about the creative process. And so if you're like me and you like behind-the-scenes stuff, this is the perfect behind-the-scenes of an individual who wants to become an author. I guess I am an author now, but I still have a hard time attaching myself to that label. All right, it's time for the Vikings to go get beat by, I think, Tennessee today. I need to go watch. So I hope you enjoyed the show. Again, mynerdworld.net. Sign up for the newsletter. Email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, and go pick up your preferred copy of EMBARK Books 1, 2, and 3. Gon Corbin and the Asteroid of Misfortune is being edited, and hopefully will be out sometime early November. All right, that's it. That's enough pitching. I'm going to go watch some football. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.